North America is home to some of the most remarkable plants in the world. We are talking about trees with genomes 10 times larger than a human's, and flowers that only grow in wind-blasted craters in the desert. From plants you can only find in a single zip code in Arkansas, to flowers that bloom only once in 90 years before they die in a spectacular display. This is the hidden botanical map of the United States. In this video, we are covering 35 plants from across America. And make sure to stick around because plant number 34's pollination tactics will shock you. Let's start our journey in the deep South. To understand why some of the rarest life on Earth is hiding in the American South, you have to realize that when the rest of the continent was buried under 2 miles of ice during the last ice age, this region was a refugium, a warm, humid sanctuary where ancient lineages made their final stand. We start in Alabama, home to a tree that shouldn't exist. The Alabama sandstone oak is a critically imperiled species that refused to leave the state. Unlike other oaks that dominate the forest, this specialist grows only on rocky sandstone outcrops. It's a shrub tree that has survived for thousands of years by clinging to terrain that nothing else wanted. But because it's restricted to just a few counties around Birmingham, the threat is clear. The expansion of the Birmingham metropolitan area has been devastating. The city and its suburbs have spread across what could have been the densest parts of the species' gene pool. Today, only around 1,200 individuals remain in the wild. One highway project, one housing development, and an entire evolutionary branch of the oak family could be erased forever. Crossing into Arkansas, we find one of the greatest botanical mysteries of the 20th century. In 1968, a woman discovered a small grove of unusual trees in a tiny corner of the Arkansas Grand Prairie. For over 20 years, botanists struggled to identify them. They looked like hawthorns, but something was off. Finally, in 1990, the mystery was solved. They figured this plant was Mespelis, also known as Stearns medlar, a genus scientists thought only existed in Europe and Asia. It's not just rare, it's a paleo-endemic, possibly a ghost of a forest that disappeared millions of years ago, or a natural hybrid that formed when European settlers brought the common medlar to Arkansas in the 1800s. Today, there are only about 25 individual trees left in the wild, all in the protected Konechny Grove. If a single tornado or a localized disease hits, this entire American lineage is gone. It is a race against time, as botanists try to graft these survivors onto other trees just to keep the species breathing. As we move into the Florida Panhandle, we encounter the Florida torreya, also known as stinking cedar. This tree is a survivor from the era of the dinosaurs. It hides in steephead ravines, deep, cool pockets of earth that stay at a constant temperature year-round. What makes the torreya's story so intense is its migration. As the world warmed, the tree couldn't move north fast enough. It became trapped in these ravines. Today, it's often called a walking tree because it tries to sprout from its base as the main trunk dies off. It is currently the focus of one of the most controversial conservation efforts in history: assisted migration, where humans are physically moving the tree hundreds of miles north to save it from a climate it can no longer survive. Moving from the swampy lowlands of the south, we head north into the ancient, crumbling peaks of the Appalachian Mountains and the jagged eastern seaboard. This is a land of mountain islands, where rare plants are trapped on high-altitude summits, surrounded by a sea of warmer air that they cannot cross. We have to start with the most famous strict endemic in the world. Despite what sci-fi movies suggest, the Venus flytrap does not live in a tropical jungle. It is native to only a tiny 75-mile radius around Wilmington, North Carolina. It is a biological computer. It can count the touches on its trigger hairs to ensure it doesn't waste energy closing on a raindrop or a fallen leaf. But here is the reality. Fire suppression is killing them. These plants need regular wildfires to clear out the underbrush that shades them out. But there's a second, darker threat: poaching. In 2019, a single poacher was caught with over 200 Venus flytraps stuffed in bags. Poachers sell them for as little as 25 cents to $1.50 per plant to black market dealers, who then resell them at massive markups. The trade became so severe that in 2014, the state made Venus flytrap poaching a felony, punishable by up to 25 months in prison. The world's most famous predator is being slowly smothered by shadows and stolen by the truckload. In Virginia, we find the Virginia roundleaf birch. This tree is a survivor of a different kind. It survived extinction. For nearly 60 years, it was considered extinct until a single population of about 40 trees was rediscovered by a creek in 1975. It is a stunted version of a birch, with strange, rounded leaves that look more like a coin than a tree leaf. Today, every Virginia roundleaf birch in existence is a descendant of those 40 survivors, making its genetic pool one of the shallowest and most vulnerable on the planet. But here's the twist. It's also a conservation victory. Through aggressive cultivation programs, there are now over 900 trees in protected sites across Virginia's national forests. The original wild population has dwindled to just a single tree, but the species went from 40 trees to nearly 1,000 in 30 years. It's proof that when we decide a species matters, we can pull it back from the edge, even if it means keeping it alive through human intervention. Deep in the sandy Big Hammock of Georgia, the Georgia plume creates a spectacle found nowhere else. It produces massive, 4-foot-tall plumes of white flowers that look like frozen lightning. But there's a catch. The Georgia plume is self-incompatible. It cannot pollinate itself. Because the remaining populations are so isolated from one another, separated by decades of pine plantation development, they are essentially biological hermits. Every spring, they bloom in a spectacular white display, but they aren't producing seeds. They are waiting for a partner that may never arrive. The flowers are essentially calling out to a population that's too far away to hear them. From the southern mountains, we move north to the Great Lakes region and the heavily forested Northeast, where plants live in the margins of human development and rely on hydrological cycles that are increasingly being disrupted. In Michigan, we find a plant that is essentially a water specialist. The Michigan monkeyflower is found in only a few counties, specifically near the shores of the Great Lakes. It's an obligate wetland plant, meaning it literally cannot survive without a constant flow of cold, pH-neutral spring water. But here's the catch. It almost never produces seeds. Instead, it relies on fragmentation, which means it breaks off pieces of itself to grow new plants. This makes it a genetic copy-paste of itself from thousands of years ago. The primary threats are groundwater pumping, development along lakeshores and lawnmowers, since many populations exist on private property. If a disease hits these clones, or if groundwater is diverted for the next housing development, the Michigan monkeyflower has no genetic backup plan. It simply vanishes forever. Wisconsin holds a plant that lives on the edge of a hydrological seesaw. Facet's locoweed grows on the sandy shores of just a few lakes. It needs the lake levels to fluctuate wildly. When the water is high, it kills off the competition. When the water recedes, the locoweed seeds wake up and claim the bare sand. But as we stabilize lake levels for boat docks and lakefront property, we are silencing the very cycle this plant needs. It is a species that thrives on chaos, and in our quest for a perfect lake view, we are unintentionally tidying it into extinction. We arrive in Maine, where a tiny yellow flower became one of the most famous plants in American environmental history. Furbish's lousewort grows only along a 140-mile stretch of the St. John River in Maine and New Brunswick. It's a river specialist that depends on ice scouring, the violent grinding of winter ice along the riverbanks, to create the unstable, semi-shaded habitat it needs. Without that ice, competing vegetation takes over, and the lousewort dies. In 1976, the plant was rediscovered after being thought extinct for decades. The discovery came at a critical moment. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was planning the Dickey-Lincoln Dam, an $800 to $900 million hydroelectric project that would have flooded 88,000 acres of northern Maine forest, including nearly all of the lousewort's habitat. The plant's endangered status gave environmental groups the legal leverage to stall the project for years. By 1986, Congress officially deauthorized the dam. The New Jersey Pine Barrens is a world of its own, an acidic, sandy wilderness in the middle of the most densely populated region of the country. The Pine Barrens gentian is its crown jewel. It produces an electric blue flower that seems to glow against the white sand. But it is a fire follower. It requires the intense heat of a pine forest fire to clear out the leaf litter so its tiny seeds can touch the soil. Because New Jersey is so crowded, we have become too good at putting out fires. But in 2007, something remarkable happened. The state began conducting controlled burns specifically to save the gentian. Firefighters now deliberately set fires in the Pine Barrens, managing the blaze down to the acre to create the exact conditions this flower needs. It's one of the few places in America where fire isn't the enemy, it's the prescription. As we move south from New England, we enter the unique shale barrens and limestone valleys of the mid-Atlantic, a geologically ancient landscape where the soil itself determines survival. West Virginia is home to shale barrens, steep, south-facing slopes of crumbling rock that get so hot in the summer they can actually burn human skin. This is where the shale onion makes its stand. It is a stress tolerator. While other plants would shrivel, the shale onion uses the heat to its advantage, keeping its water stored in a thick bulb deep beneath the shifting rocks. It's a plant that has turned a barren wasteland into a private fortress where no other species can compete. In the limestone woods of Pennsylvania, we find the Paxillus leatherflower. This isn't your garden variety clematis. Its petals are thick, fleshy, and purple, looking more like a piece of cured leather than a flower. It is a specialist of calcareous, meaning it has calcium-rich soils. Because these soils are often the first to be mined for cement and construction, the leatherflower's habitat is being literally dug out from under it. It's a species that is losing the ground it stands on, one quarry at a time. Crossing back into the South, we encounter the unique ecosystems of Tennessee and Kentucky, places where ancient megafauna still echo in the plant life that remains. Tennessee provides us with a rare victory story. The Tennessee coneflower was one of the first plants ever placed on the endangered species list. It lives in cedar glades, open areas of flat limestone that look like natural parking lots. For decades, these glades were used as dumping grounds or for off-road vehicle racing, crushing the flowers. But through a massive statewide effort, Tennessee protected these rocky islands, and in 2011, the Tennessee coneflower became one of the first plants to ever be removed from the endangered species list because its population recovered so well. It is proof that we can turn the tide. Kentucky's rarest plant has a strange, ghostly connection to a lost world. The running buffalo clover didn't just live alongside the American bison, it needed them. It grew along the paths that buffalo herds stomped through the woods. The buffalo would graze the taller plants down and scarify the soil with their hooves, creating the perfect nursery for the clover. When the buffalo were wiped out, the clover nearly vanished with them. Today, it survives in small pockets where cattle or mowers simulate the disturbance of the ancient herds. Like the Georgia plume, it blooms year after year, but without its buffalo partners, it produces almost no seeds. The clover is blooming in a world that no longer exists. Leaving the mountains behind, we move into the center of the country, the Great Plains. Here, plants don't just survive. They thrive on chaos, wind, and shifting sands. In the Nebraska sandhills, there is a plant that actually seeks out disaster. The blowout beard tongue only grows in blowouts, large, wind-eroded craters in the sand dunes where nothing else can take root. If the sand stabilizes and grass starts to grow, the beard tongue dies. It is a pioneer of the void. But as humans have worked to stabilize the dunes for cattle ranching, we have accidentally destroyed the unstable habitat this plant needs to breathe. Today, conservation efforts use intensive bison grazing and controlled off-road vehicle use to deliberately create new blowouts, giving the beard tongue habitat to colonize. We are now engineering chaos to save a plant that thrives on disaster, reactivating the very erosion processes that ranchers spent a century trying to stop. While most people know echinacea from the pharmacy shelf, the Topeka purple coneflower is a specialist that refuses to leave the rocky, limestone-heavy soils of the Kansas prairie. This isn't just a flower, it's an evolutionary fortress. It has a massive taproot that can extend 5 feet into the earth to find water during Kansas droughts that would kill almost any other plant. But it's currently in a battle with genetic dilution. Because common coneflowers are being planted in gardens nearby, the unique genetic code of this Kansas native is being washed out. We often think of orchids as tropical, but Oklahoma is home to the Oklahoma grass pink, a terrestrial orchid that lives in the tall grass prairies. It's a deceptive plant. It produces a beautiful pink flower with a fake landing pad for bees. When a bee lands, the flower literally collapses under the bee's weight, slamming the insect into the pollen-bearing part of the plant. It's a game of trickery. But because this orchid depends on undisturbed native prairie, it is vanishing as the plains are converted to agriculture. Oklahoma has lost vast stretches of its tallgrass prairie over the past century to farming and development. The grass pink isn't just rare. It's blooming in isolated fragments too small to sustain a breeding population. Like the Michigan monkeyflower and the buffalo clover, it's stuck in a loop where the adults persist, but the next generation never arrives. Missouri is home to Edaphic Islands, pockets of limestone glades that act like deserts in the middle of a forest. Here, the Missouri bladderpod reigns. It is a tiny, bright yellow flower that has evolved to tolerate soil so thin and alkaline that most plants would wither in hours. It lives its entire life in the splash zone of these rocky outcrops, a vibrant yellow sea that appears for only a few weeks each spring before vanishing back into the cracks of the earth. Perhaps the most extreme survivor in the Midwest is the Kankakee mallow. It is found on exactly one island in the Kankakee River. For decades, the plant was failing to reproduce, and no one knew why. Then scientists discovered the secret. Its seeds are encased in a shell so thick that they require the heat of a literal wildfire to crack them open. In Illinois, fire is not a destroyer. It is a midwife. Without the flame, the Kankakee mallow is locked in its own seed, unable to be born. But here's the problem. Invasive honeysuckle took over the island. By 2014, when botanists visited, the mallow had completely vanished from view, overtaken by dense thickets of invasive plants. Langham Island is now a designated nature preserve, off-limits to visitors, while volunteers spend years clearing honeysuckle and conducting controlled burns to bring the mallow back from the edge of extinction. The mallow survived the Ice Age, but it nearly didn't survive a century without fire. As we cross the 100th meridian, the air turns bone dry. We enter the rain shadow, where altitude and isolation create islands in the sky that harbor species found nowhere else. In the rugged sapphire mountains of Montana, there is a plant that lives on the edge of the wind. The sapphire rockcress is found only on high altitude, rocky slopes where the soil is nearly non-existent. It is a stress-adapted specialist. While most plants spend their energy growing tall, the rockcress grows horizontally, hugging the ground to avoid the freezing mountain gusts. Its secret is its root system, a taproot that acts as a hydraulic anchor, drilling into the cracks of solid rock to find moisture that has been trapped for decades. It is a slow-motion survivor, living a life of centuries in a world where a single season of extreme drought could end a population. Deep in the Beaver Rim of central Wyoming, the desert yellowhead grows in soil so strange it looks like powdered bone. This is tufaceous, volcanic soil ash that has been compressed over millions of years. It's rich in minerals but incredibly difficult for plants to penetrate. The yellowhead has evolved to thrive in this volcanic dust, creating bright yellow pom-poms of flowers in a landscape that looks like a lunar wasteland. Discovered only in 1990, it reminds us that we are still finding new, unique life in the American West. Idaho holds one of the most geographically restricted plants in the United States. Christ's paintbrush exists on exactly one mountain, Mount Harrison. It covers only about 200 acres of subalpine meadow. Because it lives in such a tiny island in the sky, it is hyper-vulnerable to invasive species. Specifically, smooth brome, a grass introduced in the 1930s for cattle forage, is moving up the mountain and literally choking the paintbrush out of its only home on Earth. The Idaho Native Plant Society has spent the last decade hand-pulling brome grass, one blade at a time, on hands and knees, trying to save a species from a plant we deliberately brought here 90 years ago. This is a plant that survived the shifting of continents only to be threatened by a blade of grass we planted ourselves. The landscape shifts from mountain peaks to the red rocks and high alkalinity dust of the Southwest, where the soil itself becomes toxic, and only the most specialized alchemists of the plant world can survive. High in the shaded canyons of Arizona, the Arizona bugbane acts as a monsoon clock. This plant is hyper-dependent on the timing of the summer rains. If the rains come too late, the plant won't flower. If they come too early, the heavy drops destroy its delicate pollinators. It is a balancing act. As the monsoon patterns shift due to a changing climate, the bugbane is losing its window of opportunity, standing on the edge of a cliff where one dry summer could end a million-year lineage. In the high, arid mountains of New Mexico, the Todson's pennyroyal is a master of the long game. It grows on steep, gully-eroded slopes of limestone. Because it lives in such an unstable environment, it doesn't just rely on seeds. It spreads via rhizomes, underground stems that act like anchors. If a landslide takes out half the plant, the underground network ensures the other half survives. It is a plant that has built its own biological insurance policy against the gravity of the mountains. As we cross into Texas, we hit a botanical tragedy that almost ended in the 1980s. The Texas snowbell is one of the rarest trees in North America. For decades, botanists could see them, but only on the sheerest, most dangerous limestone cliffs of the Edwards Plateau. It took years to realize why. Goats. Texas's massive ranching industry introduced animals that find the snowbell delicious. They ate every seedling for a century, leaving only the cliff dwellers alive. Today, climbers have to literally rappel down cliffs to bag the seeds and grow them in cages, protected from the very animals we introduced. Utah is home to one of the most alien-looking plants in the U.S. The dwarf bear poppy grows only on gypsum soils in Washington County, soil that looks like a white, crusty lunar landscape. This soil is incredibly fragile. It forms a biological crust that takes decades to grow. One single mountain bike tire or an off-road vehicle driving through these flats shatters the crust, killing the poppy's ability to absorb moisture. In Utah, it's not just about the plant, it's about the very ground beneath it. In 2020, the Bureau of Land Management had to install over 15 miles of fencing around critical bear poppy habitat because ATV riders kept cutting through the area. One tire track can destroy a patch of biological soil crust that took 50 years to form. The bear poppy is fighting a war against recreation. In the ash meadows of Nevada, the soil isn't just dry, it's white with salt. Most plants would be chemically burned the moment their roots touch this ground, but the Amargosa niterwort thrives here. It is a halophyte, an extremist that drinks salt water to survive. It is the gatekeeper of the Mojave's hidden springs. If the groundwater levels in Nevada drop even a few inches due to human consumption, these salt flats dry out completely, and the niterwort and the entire ecosystem it stabilizes disappears into the dust. The dry heat of the desert is replaced by the cool, ancient shadows of the Pacific coast, where Ice Age refugia preserved species that exist nowhere else on the planet, and where the largest living things on Earth are now facing threats invisible to the naked eye. In the Siskiyou Mountains of Oregon, there is a region that never froze during the Ice Age and never dried out during the Great Droughts. It is a time capsule. Inside this capsule lives the Kalmiopsis. It is a pre-glacial relic, a plant that looks like it belongs in the era of the dinosaurs. It survived because the mountains it lives on are made of serpentine rock, which is toxic to most other plants. The Kalmiopsis evolved to eat the heavy metals in the rock, using toxicity as a shield to keep other plants from moving into its territory. Deep in the Wenatchee Mountains, this plant is a hydrological specialist. It lives in high-elevation meadows that stay wet only for a few weeks a year. It is a plant that lives on a timer. If the snowpack melts too fast, which is happening more frequently now, the checker mallow doesn't have enough time to finish its life cycle. It is currently one of the most climate-sensitive species in the Northwest, serving as the canary in the coal mine for the health of the Cascade Mountain Range. You cannot talk about California's unique flora without the coast redwood. But the story here isn't just their height, it's their code. The redwood has a megagenome, containing 27 billion base pairs of DNA. To put that in perspective, that is nearly 10 times the size of a human genome. This massive genetic library is what allows them to live for 2,000 years and resist fire, rot, and insects. They are essentially biological fortresses. But they have a bottleneck weakness. They drink the fog. They get up to 40% of their water from coastal mist. As the Pacific coast warms and the fog banks lift, these giants are losing their primary hydration source. Between 1950 and 2010, coastal fog along the California coast decreased by 33%. The world's tallest carbon sinks are at risk of a silent drought, not from lack of rain, but from the disappearance of the air itself. We leave the mainland entirely, crossing thousands of miles of open ocean to reach the most isolated archipelago on Earth, and then north to the frozen edge of the continent, where plants cling to crumbling volcanic peaks in the Arctic wind. On the heights of the Haleakala volcano, 10,000 feet above the Pacific, lives the silver sword. It looks like a giant, metallic sea urchin. It lives for up to 90 years, growing slowly in the volcanic cinder, and then, in its final year, it sends up a massive 6-foot-tall flowering stalk with hundreds of purple blossoms. Once it flowers, it dies. It is a suicide bloomer. But here is the twist. The silver sword is being cooked from the bottom up. As temperatures rise, the Argentine ant, an invasive species that arrived in Hawaii in the 1940s, is moving up the volcano, displacing the native yellow-faced bees that the silver sword relies on for its once-in-a-lifetime bloom. In the 1920s, there were over 50,000 silverswords on Haleakala. By 2020, there were fewer than 6,000, the ants are winning. Staying on Hawaii, its most dramatic story is the alula, or cabbage on a stick. It grows on the sheer, vertical sea cliffs of Kauai. Its only natural pollinator was a specific species of hawk moth that is now believed to be extinct. Without the moth, the plant cannot reproduce on its own. To save it, botanists have to become human moths, rappelling down 3,000-foot cliffs on ropes to hand-pollinate the flowers with a paintbrush. In 2016, a botanist named Steve Perlman made his 300th descent down the Na Pali cliffs to pollinate these plants. He's been doing this for over 30 years. The alula blooms every year, but without its moth, it produces no seeds, just like the Georgia plume waiting for its distant partner, or the buffalo clover waiting for herds that will never return. It survives only because one man is willing to risk his life, year after year, to reach flowers that are blooming for a partner that will never come. We end our geographic tour in the coldest reaches of the U.S. On the wind-whipped Adak Island, there is a fern so rare that it was once thought to be a myth. There are fewer than 150 of these ferns left in existence, clinging to the side of a single crumbling mountain. They are glacial survivors, plants that sat out the ice age on a tiny volcanic peak that stayed above the ice. They have survived for 20,000 years in one spot, but they are now facing a new threat. The very soil they sit on is eroding away as the permafrost melts. From the sandstone outcrops of Alabama to the volcanic cliffs of Alaska, we've covered 35 plants that exist nowhere else on Earth. Some are thriving, some are barely holding on. And some, like the Georgia plume, the buffalo clover, and the alula, are blooming in a world that no longer has the partners they need to survive. The United States has one of the most diverse botanical landscapes on the planet, but most of it is invisible until it's gone. These plants hold the soil together, regulate the water we drink, and provide the foundation for every ecosystem around them. They are the silent architects of the American landscape. We are Wildline. If you want to explore more hidden wonders of the natural world, hit the subscribe button and join us as we uncover the stories of the survivors hiding in plain sight. Because sometimes, the smallest seed holds the greatest story ever told.